The most successful movie franchise of all time is Star Wars, but most people know that. It's become so mainstream that you could ask almost anyone on the street about the films, and they could tell you what it's about and who the main characters are. My highest viewed video here on the channel has over 7 million views, and it's about Star Wars. It goes to show just how wide of a reach Star Wars has. I won't be going through the history of the franchise like I normally do with each review, because I've recently covered the complete history in a feature-length documentary called Star Wars Full Circle. I'll leave a sneak peek to that at the end of the video. The main focus of this review is to talk about Star Wars The Last Jedi, and this is a spoiler review, so if you haven't seen the film yet, go ahead and hit pause, and definitely come back once you've seen it. There's a lot to think about and discuss, so consider this your last spoiler warning. Here we go. Luke's dead. Snoke's dead. And surprisingly, Leia isn't dead. And of course, Yoda returns. A lot happens in the film, but also a lot of things didn't happen that people thought would happen. And because of that, some people love it and some people hate it. It's a very polarizing film.
Some of the stuff that happens, people are going to be like, oh my God.
So let's unpack it. At first, I wanted to make a quick review to share my thoughts, but after seeing so many people have such a strong reaction, I took a step back. It takes time to process things. So, now that I've done that, here are my thoughts. The movie's pretty bold. It essentially takes everything you think will happen in the story and does just the opposite. Rey returns Luke's lightsaber and he throws it over his shoulder, off a cliff. We finally get to discover if Rey is a Skywalker or a Kenobi, and she's related to no one. Snoke has been built up to be more powerful than anybody, and yet he's killed off mid-film. This didn't sit well with most of the fans that made theories over the past 2 years. The film is either telling us we shouldn't decide in our minds what we think should happen, or it's trying to keep things fresh. Here are some of the things of note, and I'll go in order of when they happen in the film. The spaceships in this film are the biggest we've seen yet in any episode to date. The first ship we see is called the Dreadnought, which is huge on its own, only to be one-upped immediately by Snoke's command ship, the Supremacy. After the opening battle, we pick right back up where The Force Awakens left off. Rey hands the lightsaber to Luke and he discards it, which illustrates where Luke was at. But one thing bothered me about the handoff scene, and that's how it was shot. The lighting is completely different from The Force Awakens. Take a look at this side by side. Aren't these scenes supposed to take place at the same time? The Force Awakens was cloudy and it gave a feeling of mystery. But look at The Last Jedi. It looks like a sunny day at the beach. It's a small detail, but I just thought it was a little weird and inconsistent. But that's not that important. What is important are the changes we see in Luke. He's at a very different place in his life. He's given up the Jedi Order completely and feels guilty about failing Han and Leia, and ultimately Ben, their son. We also learn the truth about what happened that night, when Ben turned to the dark side. This is where a lot of people have a problem. In a moment of weakness, Luke attempts to kill Ben out of fear. As his teacher, he was seeing Ben gradually become evil, and felt the only way to prevent history from repeating itself was to stop another student from becoming a Darth Vader. Something that some fans don't believe Luke would ever do. Because at a time where Yoda and Obi-Wan were training Luke to kill his father, it was Luke who was the one who had faith that his father could come back. The Last Jedi shows Luke at such a low point in his life. But after thinking about it, that's exactly why he rejects the ways of the Jedi. Because like him, the Jedi have a history of failure. He wanted to break that circle by removing himself, making him the Last Jedi. Luke is simply a reflection of Yoda. Anakin turned to the dark side, wiping out most of the Jedi. And in his defeat, Yoda went into hiding. But the big difference between the two is Luke stops believing. And I've heard people complain about her training with Luke was too short, but let's get one thing straight. Rey isn't trained by Luke, and she's not a Jedi. Each film has a different story to tell, and this one is about understanding the Force, not becoming a Jedi. For Luke, it was confronting Vader. But Rey did confront something pretty significant, the truth about where she comes from, which for me was incredibly similar to the never-ending story in the scene with the mirror gate. The film also drops a huge revelation. We learn that the future of the Jedi isn't about bloodline. That's where Snoke gets things wrong. This is where I think the film really does something powerful. It's a statement that says it's not just about the Skywalkers. Another revelation is the Force is also bigger than just the Jedi. And who better to correct the wrong way of thinking than Yoda? When Yoda made his return, everyone in my theater went nuts. And rightly so. And not just Yoda, but Puppet Yoda. It was so great to see the puppet again. It didn't look exactly the same, but it was still really special. Another cool thing we get to see that we've never seen in a Star Wars film are books. I enjoyed seeing all the scenes of Luke's daily routine on the island, and it was a great Easter egg seeing the X-Wing hidden in the water. Some of my favorite moments in the film were all the new things you learn about the Force. Two of the biggest being Force projection and what people are calling Force FaceTime. Force projection apparently can kill you, and this ultimately is how Luke dies, which I wasn't expecting at all. I really still can't believe that Luke's gone. That's another big thing that people had a problem with. I was okay with it, but just not ready for it. If there was a character to die in the film, I thought it would have been Leia. But as for Luke, I thought it was really fitting how he went out. He died looking at the twin suns, a scene in the original film where we really connect with Luke for the first time. It was perfect. My two favorite things in the film were Adam Driver and Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill, I think, gave his best performance ever as Luke, with the exception of the scene in Return of the Jedi that he shared with Carrie Fisher. I think that will always be my favorite scene in the entire franchise. To me, it's beautiful in every way.
You have a power I don't understand and could never have.
You're wrong, Leia. You have that power too. In time, you'll learn to use it as I have.
The scene has so much weight to it because that's the moment when Star Wars truly becomes a story about family. It's not just about father and son anymore. In that scene, Leia becomes part of the family.
And my sister has it.
And because of that moment, when I saw Luke and Leia together again in the new film for one last time, it was really special. The Last Jedi directly mirrors that scene from Return of the Jedi. And speaking of connection, that's why Adam Driver to me was my second favorite thing in the film. I loved how he was able to connect with Rey through the Force. Not just to feel her presence, but for the first time, characters can actually see each other that are light years apart. Until it gets an official name, Force FaceTime is what I'll call it. And when we learn that the Force can connect people not just visually, but it can transport physical matter through space, really changes things. We get to see this when the raindrops come through Rey's location and hits Kylo's face. This can be used to foreshadow what comes later. Finally, let's talk about the reveals. The Star Wars saga is about the Skywalker family. So if Rey isn't a Skywalker, then this sequel trilogy is about the journey of Ben Solo. The second reveal to debunk everyone's expectations was that Snoke's identity isn't important. and he gets taken out, which just so happens to be my favorite scene. The Praetorian Guards are throwbacks to the Emperor's royal guards, but much better skilled. Finally, the reveal that I'll end the review on, I think, is the biggest one, that Leia can use the Force. And hearing her theme play as she floated in space was beautiful. Leia has some really great moments that I think truly honor Carrie Fisher. I loved the scene where R2 played Leia's old recording to inspire Luke to join the fight. It was great just knowing that he still had it stored inside him for over 40 years. I just wonder what's next for Leia's story. We'll all find out in about 2 years when JJ completes the trilogy, but originally Episode 9 was supposed to be Leia's film. I think it's really tragic that we'll never get to see that film. But what Rian Johnson did with her character, if it is her goodbye, I think he did a great job. To me, in a way, it feels like the end of the Skywalkers. From here on out, the story belongs to the new cast. And The Last Jedi doesn't feel like part 2. Instead, it feels like the final episode. Overall, I give the film an A-. It had several flaws, but I loved it. But what did you guys think? The Last Jedi is a very polarizing film. Sadly, it's amazing how toxic things can become just about discussing this film. I'd like to leave you with a clip from one of the interviews that I shot for my upcoming documentary. I had the privilege of getting some thoughts about The Last Jedi from my friend John, and what he says really helped me collect how I felt about the film. Even with its flaws, the film really tries to tell us what Star Wars is all about.
There's no way around it. The Last Jedi is controversial. And I think one of the reasons why The Last Jedi is controversial is because of what it's about. At the end of the day, The Last Jedi is about ending the Skywalker saga. But I think that that is right and good because the Force is moving on to other people. When we saw Luke in A New Hope, he was a nobody. We had no idea that he was connected to Darth Vader. That's what Star Wars is about. It's about taking people who come from nothing and raising them up to being heroes. That last scene in The Last Jedi where the young boy in the stable goes out and looks at the stars and you realize that he's using the Force. That is the new binary sunset. I personally loved the way how Luke went out. Luke essentially robbed Kylo Ren of his victory against Han. What a wonderful way of putting Kylo Ren in his place. What a heroic thing for Luke to do, to stand there and say, your victories haven't meant anything, and I am so much more powerful than you that I don't even need to be here. And especially that one last line, he says, if you strike me down in anger, I will be with you for the rest of your life, just like your father. What a wonderful line of telling Ben that he is in the wrong. And then seeing see around kid. Like, Luke showed his mastery of the Force there in a way that was amazing. I can't think of a better way for his character to go out. The Last Jedi wrapped up so many threads, answered so many questions. The sky's the limit for the story and where it could go. I'm excited to see what happens next.